Okay, lecture 3 for semester 2, carrying on with MVC and in particular looking at application bootstrapping. This week I want to dedicate all the class time to the assignment again and carry on with this idea that I'll record the lectures for you to watch. You can submit questions to the wiki, I'll answer them. Class time though I'd like to give over to working on the assignment proper. I'd like to talk a little bit in the lecture, or in the screencast, about the idea of a single build before we get into the details of application bootstrap and configuration, and then I may talk a little bit about testing as well. In terms of questions on the wiki from last week, thank you to everybody who put questions on there. It really does make life much easier for me because it means that I only have to answer the questions once, and hopefully it makes it easier because if you have a question you want to ask me, you can just put it on there. You don't have to wait for me to stop answering questions somewhere else, and hopefully the whole thing's just a bit more efficient. It means that I can spend the class time, answering questions which you need before in class. So hopefully we can carry on working this way. I think it's quite efficient. Questions on the wiki from last week asked about the assignment marking scheme. The marking scheme is exactly as it is on the assignment sheet, and the important thing to bear in mind about that is this is a creative piece of work where I'm asking you to demonstrate what you've learned. I will share with you the rubric that I'm going to use, that I do use for marking in a more granular way than this, but I'm reticent. I wouldn't want you to think that if you go down the rubric and you tick all the boxes, as it were, that you will get a good mark. Okay, the idea is that the rubric gives me a guide to what I should and shouldn't do in terms of what you hand in, but this is still a creative piece of work and it's meant to be representative of what you've done. So I'm creating a space here for you to put some of yourself in. Okay, this isn't a robotic tick the boxes thing. This is about you trying to, actually do something creative and constructive. So I kind of hope that you'll seize that opportunity and not treat it like don't treat it like a question and answer session where you've just got to get to the goal. This is about recording your journey and about gaining some knowledge. So please bear it in mind that the idea here is for you to invest a part of yourself in this and be creative with it. But I will share the rubric that I'm going to use. I will try and get that out to you this week. There was a question that said, what should my GitHub homepage look like? And I've pointed to just a random page. Here's a Python project. You have to bear in mind that Python projects are easier to build, so there's probably a little bit less detail here. Have a look around GitHub and see what other projects do. There are some really great examples of readmes on there. From my perspective, though, your GitHub page needs to have a brief description of what this is all about. So you need to say, I'm trying to build a web-based class register. But I think you should also say, I'm doing this as a part of a web architectures module. This is a portfolio piece where we're looking at MVC, and in particular we're investigating aspects of domain modeling and web services, etc. Whatever it is you feel this is about. So say at a high level what the application is, but then say why you're building it. So we're building this to explore, aspects of MVC. So make it obvious to people why you're putting it there and what you're doing. So that's the background stuff that you won't find in all GitHub projects. The thing which you will find in all projects that needs to be there are instructions on how to check it out and how to get it running. And there's a blindingly obvious reason for this. In terms of my marking scheme, I'm going to look at this from two different perspectives. I'm going to look at this from the perspective of somebody, you're applying for a job, and I've said to you, have you got any evidence of any work you've done in this domain? And you might have said, well, I built a web app as a part of web architectures. Oh, great. And here's a GitHub URL. Okay, well, I'll check that out and have a look. So I'm going to use the README to guide myself through the process of looking at your project from that perspective. So if there's something you particularly want to direct me towards, then use the README to do that. But the README should make it obvious to me how I get hold of your project and how I make it run, how I actually see the thing running in front of me on a system that had nothing installed before. That didn't have any setup done before. So you shouldn't make any assumptions about whether this is Windows or or Linux or whatever it is. So you only need to put this from the perspective of your project. Here's the GitHub checkout command. Here's how you run it. And that's actually 2 lines for this project, so it's not particularly difficult. You might need to say something about setting up a database. And this is where it's your discretion here, how much detail you go into. I wouldn't go crazy. I mean, look at the other README projects. They're seldom more than 2 or 3, the equivalent of 2 or 3 A4 pages, and I think that would be too much. 40 lines of text is fine, or whatever you feel is right. But for part of my marking, I'm going to be looking at your GitHub project from the perspective of somebody who's trying to understand what you did in this class and what you've understood from it. So I need to be able to get the thing running, but then once I've got it up and running, you might want to give me a use case for creating a sign-up sheet or how you check into a class. Okay, that would be a perfectly acceptable thing to put on your README. This is how you interact with my application. This is a great thing that I show using a RESTful service to get the people who signed into a particular class or something like that. Again, it's your discretion. It's your project. Okay, so you put as much or as little as you want in there, but from the perspective of marking it, if you like, as a black box, I'm going to be guided by what's in that README. Obviously I'm going to do some white box testing as well, where I'm going to get in the repository and I'm going to look at the code you've written. So there are 2 conflicting things there, but the README should guide me through. Anybody who you do give this URL to, they're going to use the README to try and structure their investigation, if you like, for want of a better word. So, sorry, I'm not sure I've answered the question there. The README needs to guide somebody through this project, and because this is a portfolio piece, it needs to guide somebody through what you want to show them. So you can guide people to things that you're particularly proud of. If you've written a beautifully documented domain class, make reference to it. Just use this to point people at what you think are the best parts of your project. And I think, as I said here, think of it as a covering letter for your repository. It's the first thing somebody sees, and it's what's going to introduce them to your project and what you want them to see. So, this isn't a hard and fast. You must have ABC, although you do need to have build instructions in there. But use it to guide somebody, as a finding aid for somebody to look through your project. There was a specific question about .class files in GitHub. Short answer, there shouldn't be any class files in GitHub. Your gitignore file will filter them out. The reason for that is that we don't know what environment somebody else might be on. So we're working in Java 7 with Grails 2.1.3, I think. Somebody else might be in a Java 6 environment. The .class files generated between Java 6 and Java 7 are very different. So GitHub needs to just be a source repository, and the build instructions, which are in your README, need to take that source tree and build a working system from it. Yeah, not with any extra downloads or extra instructions about go here and download this JavaScript library. It should be checkout, build, run. Yeah, and it should be simple. That simple. Putting classes inside if you've got classes inside your repository, something is going to break in that checkout, build, run cycle for somebody somewhere. It's a warning sign that something's not quite right with the build. If you've got .class files in your Git repository, it needs to all build from source code. So that's why. If you've got .groovy files missing from GitHub, then that's a different thing, and that might indicate that your default branch isn't the one you've checked your changes into. So be sure to check, and I'll just show you actually. If I go to GitHub and on my eRegister project, you'll see that my default branch is Ian Dev here. Here are all the other branches of this project, and the default is master. And if I go onto the master branch, you'll see that there are no files, whereas if I go onto the default Ian Dev branch, there are all my changes. And the way that you change that is you go into settings and you can pick your default branch here. So that's the branch that I'm going to work with. So that's something to just watch out for. There was also a question about domain modeling. Pardon me. So a few points here. This is your assignment, right? It's an opportunity for you to demonstrate what you've learned. If you think the domain model is wrong, you're entirely at liberty to change it for what you think is right. Make sure you write up why that is, but it's your project. Don't feel constrained by the domain model that's there. Having said that, naming is one of the hardest things to get right in all of software, I think, and especially in the web, because there are so many different interpretations for words. Before you throw this domain model out, make sure that it's not just a different interpretation of a particular word. Session, I think, was a word that I saw used, and session is probably quite a good word for something that we've called class here. Try and understand the definition, if you like. So I've written some text here which I've tried to explain the meaning of the particular classes. And I think I talked about them quite a lot in class, but if you've missed that, that might be where some confusion has arisen. So I've tried to document here what I think the meaning of all those classes are. If you want to change this, though, document it and change it. The ball is entirely in your court, and it's your discretion. You've got to produce something you're happy for other people to look at, and if you think that a good use of your time is correcting the domain model, then go for it. Absolutely. If you really want to show somebody that you're an excellent domain modeler, and that this domain model isn't what you would have come up with, you'd have come up with something better, then by all means put time and effort into improving it. That's really cool. So those are the wiki questions. I was surprised, as I said, I think, that I didn't see any questions specifically about scaffolds. But that's okay. If they do come up, then I can answer them as and when they do. Just put them on the wiki. So moving towards the lecture proper, a plug for a book which I have plugged before, but I'm going to plug again. Robert C. Martin's Clean Code. I've struggled a little bit with the balance of tools for web architectures like GitHub, and whether we should use PHP or Grails or Ruby. The sort of generic workplace things and the specifics of how you use a HTTP header, etc. My justification for that is that getting along as a part of a team in a modern web architecture environment has become the critical skill. Being able to work as a part of a team on a shared code base is a difficult thing to get your head around, and there's a term rock star which used to mean you were great. If you were a rock star, you were paid £60,000 a year, and you were the man that the organisation would do anything to keep. Maybe over the past 5 years, it's almost become a derogatory term, and it refers to that person in your organisation who generally leaves a trail of destruction behind them. They get everything done, but woe betide the person who has to follow them, because they leave things undocumented and untested and cut corners, and it's become I don't want any of you to become that person, certainly. Focusing on tools like Git mean that you're focusing on the code improving for everybody who has to see it, and working as a part of a team, it means that you're essentially a team player, and that's really important with web architectures today. There's little space for somebody who tears off and does their configuration management by copying a folder. That's just not on anymore, really. This book, Clean Code, is regarded pretty much as a Bible by anybody who works with web architectures, who builds systems for web deployment. It's worth a read. The subtitle is A Handbook of Agile Software Craftsmanship, and it basically is a handbook for how you should conduct yourself when you're working with web architectures and building web systems. The reason that I bring it up in this context is towards the end of the book there's a set of heuristics, and these are rules that you can use to identify possible problem areas. If you see one of these, then you've got a problem, and it's split into sections. And the one that I just wanted to briefly talk about was section E, the environment section. And rule 1 of the environment section says that you've got a problem if your build requires more than one step. And this is quite nice, actually, because there's a thread here between the questions that were asked on the wiki and what we're talking about. I'm not going to read this to you in its entirety, but it says that building a project should be a single trivial operation. And what we're saying is, in order to use a piece of software, you should just be able to check it out of your source system, say build, and go. The reason this is important is if you've just given this GitHub URL to somebody who's going to be interviewing you next week, they need to be able to check it out and build it in one step and see the code running. If you need to download some special JavaScript library, and then you need to run this database script, and then you need to, stand on your hand and whistle something, they're going to give up before they even get to this thing running. And it's the same for somebody who might be interviewing you as it is for somebody who might be a tester in your organization, or somebody who might be an interaction designer who needs to work on a new version of the code. And this particular heuristic, a build in one step, is really important. It's quite common in modern environments where you're building web architectures and web systems to have something called a continuous integration server. And what a continuous integration server does is you plug it into your source management tool, GitHub, and every few minutes it'll say, has anything changed since the last time I built on my branch? So the development branch or the release branch. If it has, it'll completely clear down the environment, the database environment. Everything gets blown away, so you've got a pristine environment. It'll check the code out, build it, run some unit tests, and then tell the world whether or not that was successful. Some officers go so far as to have a big white hat, and if you check in a change that breaks the build, you get to wear the hat for a day. Some officers turn this on their head. They have a positive sound whenever the build works. Others make obscene sounds when the build fails. But everybody knows when somebody's broken the build. Single-step builds are a kind of critical part of continuous integration infrastructures, because you need to be able to clear the environment down so you've got nothing, install it, build it, and test it in one step. So it's no good if you've got undocumented procedures or undocumented parts of your install. This one-step build is important. And it's not just advice for developers. This applies to test engineers, to support staff, graphic designers, interaction designers. All these people need to be able to get the latest version of something out and have it running in front of them. So it's important everybody understands how this works. And all these people, they're all capable of breaking the build as well in some way. So it's not just a development thing. In terms of assignment work so far, so we've set up a new Git project. You should have a Git project for this. We've created an application which was empty when you created it. You should have used the 2 weeks of domain modeling to create your domain models and then start to create relationships between them. Last week we looked at how you create a scaffolding for a domain class. We've not looked in too much detail yet about how you can modify those generated scaffolds. We'll come back to that. This week I want to talk about this, using the application's bootstrap to configure default lookup values. So, just in terms of this this build step thing that I was talking about from the book, where does the build process end and a test process start? What if some data needs to be present in the application for it to be considered to be installed? So the thing is, for the application we're building here, for this register, if I want to give this URL to somebody who's a potential employer, do I really want them to spend time setting up courses and instructors and students? Because actually I probably want to direct them directly to the web service. Especially if I'm applying for a job where it's about web services, right? I want to be able to say, oh yeah, download this project, here's the build command, here's the run it command, and then if you go to this URL you'll see an example of a web service. In order to do that, you'll need some data in the system. And although this is a slightly special case because we're building something to demonstrate our learning rather than an end system, all systems have a certain amount of reference data that needs to be set in there for the system to work properly. It's not all application data that somebody's typed in. A lot of it is data that needs to be there as part of the background. Status codes, those sorts of things. In the bad old day, what we used to have were a load of ref data scripts, so .sql scripts which would insert this reference data. One of the problems with that is that because we've now got database schemas that update themselves. So you remember we create a new domain class and magically a new table appears. We add a property to a domain class and a column will appear in the database. Keeping those old style SQL scripts in sync with that dynamic database becomes really problematic. So what we want is the application, we want the application to know how to keep its own reference data up to date so that when we install this application on a system that it's never been installed on before, the app's intelligent enough to say, oh, I seem to be missing some reference data here, I'll just create it before anything else happens. I was discussing this in class with somebody last week and they came up with a great sort of similar thing. If you've done VB programming, think of it as a kind of before form method. So something that gets executed before anything else can happen. That's what the bootstrap class is for in Groovy. So under Grails app, in the conf directory you'll find bootstrap.groovy, and here it is. It just says class bootstrap. It has an init method and a destroy method. Technically that's actually a variable pointing to a function. This is something called a closure, but don't worry about it. All you need to know is there's something called init, something called destroy, and at startup time any code I put here is executed. So this is quite useful, isn't it? This is a place where we can do some setup. So we don't need to put into our README file, oh, please make sure that you run this piece of SQL. So you start your app, then you get your database, then you run. Now we don't want any of that. What we want to do is to put some code in here which makes sure that all the reference data is up to date for a particular version of this code. Before we get into the ins and outs of this, we're talking about setting up reference data, values that will be in the database. So we need to just think about our domain models just for a second. If you remember our instructor domain class, here's mine, resplendent with its level of commenting and the fact that there's a set for the classes taught by this instructor. This class has a name, or instructor has a name and a staff ID, and then a set property as well for the classes that they teach. You might have you might have asked a question when we were first doing domain modeling, which was, why is this better than just creating SQL create table scripts? And at the time, I'll have told you that one of the big advantages to this way of working is that the create table scripts for Oracle are different to the create table scripts for MySQL, which are different again to the create table scripts for Microsoft SQL Server. And that by defining our data model as a class model and then binding it onto particular database adapters, what we've got is we've insulated ourselves from the database platform, so we've got something that's more portable. Okay, we're not as tightly bound to a particular database implementation, and that actually is a really good reason. But if it were the only reason, you might have an argument. Of course, it's not the full story. One of the reasons that we use domain classes here is that behind the scenes, the framework is saying anything which is declared as a domain class, so anything under this domain folder, as well as having all these properties, I'd like you to silently decorate them. And decorate is used in quite a specific way here. What we're saying is all domain classes have a set of domain objects are an archetype, if you like. Not quite a superclass. Don't think of it as a superclass. But if it's a domain class, the odds are you're going to be able to, well, for an instructor, the odds are I'm going to want to be able to look up by name, and I'm going to want to be able to look up by staff ID, and I'm going to want to save a new instance of this, and there are a few other operations that I'm likely to want to do against instances of this class. Silently in the background, the framework is decorating this class with help methods that let us interact with the data that's going to go in this table. Very specifically, we'll have a method called find by, and it's find by anything, any property this class has. So I can always say instructor.findBy and then a field name. So an example here is I'll be able to say instructor.findByName, find by staff ID. So in my bootstrap, and we're drawing on some of the work we did in controllers here. I'm going to declare a new variable, and actually, before I do that, sorry, here I've cleared down my database. Yeah, there are no tables in my eRegister database. I will run the app. So you can imagine this as somebody you've given this URL to. They've downloaded the app for the first time, and your instructions say, if you've got Grails installed, type run app or Grails run app. So they come along, they type Grails run app. It says server running. They navigate to this URL, and okay, so what can I do now? Right, well, we're going to improve this situation, obviously, but if you remember, we accessed the instructor scaffold by going /instructor, and there's nothing in the database. And if I say show tables now, because the application started up, remember, it's created all the tables for all our domain classes. I select star from instructor. No rows. So this is it. To answer the what do I do now question, I'd quite like to set up some default instructor records so that when this application's run for the first time, the app says, actually, all the operations you're going to want to do, you're going to want some instructors in the system. So let's set them up. So what I'll do is I'll declare a new variable, which is, because I'm self-important, I'm going to say that this system should have an instructor record for me in it. And the first thing I need to know is, does it exist already? Because I don't want to try and insert it a second time. So I will say, I'll declare a variable called IanInstructor, and then what I'm going to say is instructor, which is the class, yeah? So I'm talking about a class method here, a helper method, dot find by, that's our generic starter, if you like, for this dynamic method, and then the property Well, I'm going to want to look up by staff ID, I would have thought, really. See how staff ID is lowercase s? Well, the way that the framework differentiates where the method starts and parameters end is with capitalization, so we say staff ID with an uppercase S. I invent a staff ID for myself, and that's it. So what I've done is, I'll use println as well. I'll say println bootstrap init, just so that we can prove to ourselves that this init method is being called at startup. And then I declare a variable called inInstructor, and in there I'll call find by staff ID and then my hypothetical staff ID. Yeah. After that's run, I'll say println result of find by staff ID for Ian. Now, I could go close quote inInstructor, which is a construct that you might be familiar with, so that would be okay, wouldn't it? But just while we're in here, do you remember when we were editing the GSPs? That $curly brace notation is a convention which appears in lots of different places in dynamic languages, and most have some equivalent of it. I could actually say, I could use the templating language within the string instead. So this is basically declaring a variable to be substituted in line, and it's quite a useful way of accessing things, so we're going to do that for now. This is exactly the same syntax that we would have used inside a GSP for printing values. So in our bootstrap init method, write a message saying we're in the init method, try and look up an instructor record for me with that staff ID and print the result of that. I go back to my application, let's stop it, because bootstraps only run at application startup, so we're going to be stopping and starting the app a lot this time. Sorry if you're on a slow machine. It says packaging, it says running. With a bit of luck we'll get a message saying bootstrap : init. Oh, I've done something wrong. No such... Oh, right, yes. In order to be able to access the instructor class, I need to tell this bootstrap class to import the definitions that I want to use. So I say import, and then it's uk.ac.shu.webarch.eregister. So that's this class, yeah, this hierarchy here. Now I could say .instructor, which would allow me to use the instructor here, so that's referencing this thing. What I'm going to do actually is to say star, because I'm likely to want to be able to reference other classes from that package. So I want to be able to access all the classes in our eRegister package, so I'll say star to import them all. Save it. Let's try that run app again. Pardon me. So it says running. Hopefully this time we'll have a bootstrap init method, and then it'll tell us the result of looking up. Okay, so bootstrap init, result of find by staff ID for Ian : null, which actually is sensible, because if I select star from instructor there are no records, so that find by has found nothing, which is the situation which anybody will be in when they first run this app. So I want to set up, having not found that record, I'd like to set it up. So I could say, I'm going to say if Ian instructor is null, because obviously this bootstrap method is going to be executed the second time the application is started up, and the third, and I don't want to be creating duplicate data. I only want to do this if it's not found. So I'm now in that block. So let's say println instructor not found, create. So an instructor with that staff ID wasn't found, create one instead. I've already declared a variable, so let's reuse this. Ian instructor is a new instructor. So this is creating an object in memory. I'm creating a new instructor, and then obviously, having created it, I can set properties on it. And the properties that I want to set are staff ID. I'd better set that to the same as the one I looked up, otherwise this is all going to break, obviously. And .name, I think, is the other property. Name and staff ID, yeah. The order doesn't matter. Okay, so that's created a new object in memory. Find by is one of the methods that gets automatically decorated onto the main classes. Another one is save. I'm likely to want to save objects either by inserting them or by updating them if they already exist. So having created my object and set properties on it, I can say Ian instructor .save. Oh look, there's no E on instructor, is there? So that's what happens if I don't look one up. I'll say else. Otherwise we'll print that message saying the result of lookup was, and it'll tell us what it found. So that all looks good, yeah? I'll save it and rerun it. This time it should create a new instructor with my staff ID. So what did we say for output? Instructor not found create. So it's running. Oh, I've done something wrong again, sorry. Oh, look. Sorry, I was off in my... Oh, well. Staff ID is a property, it's not a method, obviously. Sorry. Too late on a Sunday. So I assign values to the properties, I don't call methods. I could actually call the getter and the setter, but sorry, that was a stupid mistake. Let's try that again. I think it's worth leaving those things in and not editing them out. That's the real world of developing web applications, I think, especially if you're as incompetent as me. Okay, so we got an init method, and then we got instructor not found create. So if we look at the database, there we go. There's our value, and I think if I go to the scaffold, I need to regenerate my scaffold. I'll tell you what, I'll do that now. I'm running Grails 2.2 here, whereas you should be using a 2.1 branch, and 2.2 is still quite new. Okay. So let's just run that again. Okay, so now that I've run it a second time, of course the first time it went through, it created the instructor. The second time I've got result of find by staff ID for Ian, and it's reported this object it's found. So this is the second time running, but this time instead of creating it, it's just reported back the ID that it found. And the reason that I was just rerunning it was, hopefully, yeah, to show you this is the scaffold we generated, and here's the record that I've auto created. So ideally I want to set up reference data for all the instructors now. This is useful because at the end of this block of code I've got a variable called Ian instructor, which I know is either a newly created one or one that's been looked up, and if there are other objects I need to create which are dependent on that, I can use that variable, which I'm going to in a second. But one other thing is, one of the other bits of syntactic sugar that we get is constructors which have which basically take a map. If you remember maps from last week, this is still very long-winded, isn't it? Let's face it. So one of the things we can do is the constructor, we can say so that's better, isn't it? So you can imagine if you've got 20 properties, it's still, it's making your code more compact, and compact code is seen as being better. It's easier to read. Reading through this is just a lot of lines for what it's actually trying to achieve, which is there an instructor with this staff ID? No. Create one. Yes. Use it. Actually, if you think about it, we declare a variable and we assign it. We could just put the .save on the end there. So if it's not found, then create it. This statement, instructor.find by staff ID, this returns a value which is assigned to this variable. So if it finds an instructor, then that gets assigned here. Otherwise, null gets assigned here, which is what we're using in this test. Grails and Rails as well has this idea of something called an Elvis operator. Obviously, it's called an Elvis operator because it looks like the quiff on Elvis's head. If you think of it as a smiley turned on its side. This special operator says, if the result of the previous statement was null, please execute this block of code instead. So what we might do is, if the result of looking up an instructor was null, we execute the save block instead. And that achieves the same as all that other stuff, but is substantially less verbose. So this block now says, define a variable called IanInstructor and assign to it the result of looking up by staff ID X. If the result of that lookup was null, then return instead new instructor with these details and save it. The net result is, after this line's been executed, we've got a variable called IanInstructor that's got the right details in it. Now, if I wanted to, in fact, why not I do this? I'm going to just create some nonsense. Just creating a code and 253425 and so this is now creating two instructors. This one already exists because this has been started before, but next time I run the app should say, oh, is there an instructor with staff ID 253425? No, I'll create one for you. And I could repeat this. And actually, if I have many more lines like this, a part of the clean code book is a principle called dry, which I must have mentioned before. DRY, don't repeat yourself. This is starting to look like repeated code actually, and it's a prime candidate for declaring a method called assert instructor or something, which takes the staff ID and the name as parameters and then performs this operation on them. But this is okay for what it is for now. If you feel so inclined, though, exercise for the reader, you might want to instead declare a variable that does something, or a method that does something like that, rather than doing it inline. But no matter, that's for another day. We've created two instructors there, and something else that we should just have a quick look at is courses. And we've got course name, course code, and description. I didn't generate any scaffolds for courses in my version. How are we going to get courses in there? Well, I guess we could do the same thing really. We've got course code, haven't we? So I'm going to try and look up a course by course code. Yeah, just make it up again. And if it wasn't found, new course. What other properties do courses have? Course name and description. Obviously this isn't going to fit on one page, so I'm going to do a bit of formatting. Course description. Save. So same pattern as before. Try and look up a course by its course code. If it wasn't found, then create a new course with these details. Let's. Should we just run that? Let's see what interesting way I found to introduce syntax errors this time. Okay, so no errors. Obviously we've taken all our debug information out here, which another reason for possibly moving that into a method of its own is we could have some, some debug output. If I select star from instructor, okay, there's Matthew now created, and I created the course as well, didn't I? Called Web Architectures. Oh, that's not worked. Okay. So apparently that did work. Course description. Let's have a quick look. Description. It's not course description, it's description. It's complaining, you see. One of the disadvantages of doing this all in line is that whilst it's compact, this save had actually failed, and it failed silently, which isn't good code, but not to worry. Okay, so this time it's run, and I select start from course, and there's our course created. And obviously if we run it again, a duplicate won't be created because that lookup will create the right course. So the last thing, so Bootstrap is running every startup. It's important we only create reference data if it's not present. We don't want to duplicate data. And in summary, lots of web architectures have some kind of bootstrap or startup method that we can put this kind of configuration in, and it's really useful to do it here rather than in scripts, because the application now maintains its own data model and it updates the database and it knows what reference data it needs, so it all installs in one step. Okay, we don't need to reference other scripts that have to be run. Yeah, so there you go. It's worth using this to set up reference data like courses and students and instructors. It's a fine line between setting up test data and setting up reference data. I'd put a comment in my Bootstrap saying this is actually test data, just so we know, but I think it's fine to demonstrate the principle that you're creating data that you need to get going in the Bootstrap file. If you were deploying this app for real, of course, you wouldn't have this kind of data in there, but for our purposes it's entirely appropriate. So I'd put a comment in your Bootstrap saying this is a slightly unusual thing to do, but because this project is about me demonstrating my skills in web application development rather than building an actual system. That's why I've done it this way. Obviously, in real life, somebody would have to type this reference data in, but I want to get anybody who's viewing this project up and running really quickly, and that's why I've set the data here. I wanted to make a few notes. You should be doing your own background and research on this. I can show you some stuff in class, but you need to be doing research. You need to be looking at Grails, and there's a few reasons for that. As I think I've said before, I'm interested in showing you the general pattern, not a particular framework. Grails exposes some things very cleanly for us to look at, but I can't teach you, I can't show you every framework you're going to come across in the real world, right? You need to be able to understand the kinds of phrases, so scaffold and domain model and decorate. You need to be able to understand the ideas well enough that you can essentially form a Google search for the particular thing you're looking at, and then you need to be able to go and look up the information. An example of that is we created scaffolds last week, and the front of our page, the front page of our app, still doesn't have any links through. So I've included there in the notes an example to a link to the page which documents the Grails tag link, and what that lets you do is so this is the question which I thought I would get asked actually. Here's our index.gsp, the page which is shown at the front of our app, and if you remember, I had to guess what the URL was for the instructor scaffold, so I could have said glink controller equals instructor. So I save that. I think that's right. Okay, and then I get a link to manage instructors. Those sorts of things, you need to be going and doing a bit of research to figure out, read the Grails documentation. I'm interested in you picking up the phraseology and being able to express questions about how do I put a link to a controller on my index homepage, because you're going to need to be able to express questions like that when you come across different frameworks, because whilst they'll all use the same terminology to describe their features, you're going to need to be able to find out how to implement a particular behavior in different frameworks. So that's what I'm after really. I'm after demonstrating the concepts, you understanding the words, so you can then use those words in whatever framework you end up using for yourselves. So do make sure that in your own time you're going and looking at the Grails documentation in this case, and doing some background reading. So I think that is enough for this week, and the important thing to take away is here's our bootstrap file. We've created an instructor, we've created a course. If last thing, sorry, that I should do as well. A reg class is a particular occurrence of a course, so the Monday afternoon class for web architectures, as distinct from the Tuesday afternoon class. You'll notice that rather than being strings, the properties in here are some of the properties are objects themselves, so we've got instructor and course. If I wanted to create a new reg class here, def new class equals new reg class, how do I reference the instructor and the course? So it has a name. So the name I'm going to give it is, sorry, I forgot to do this a little bit earlier on, WebArch Mondays. And the other properties it has are, apart from the set of enrolled students, it's got a class instructor and a course. Class instructor Well, that would be me, Ian instructor, which is this variable that we got here, yeah? And course. So what course is this class an instance of? Well, me putting the speech marks in there, it's an instance of the web architectures course. .save. Now, obviously, this should be wrapped in a find by code of its own, or a find by name, or it could even be wrapped in a find by class instructor and course, which use these as parameters. But either way, it should be wrapped in some kind of a check, because we don't want to create it if it already exists. But you should already have that principle down pat. Sorry, let me just get out of that. I'll rerun that now with this extra command in, and because I'm rushing, I'll have got it wrong. Okay, so the instructors won't be created, they already existed, the course already existed. The only thing I've done is to create a class, which is this, there are multiple occurrences of a particular course. If I describe reg class, select star from reg class. So now we should have this class, which is Web Architecture Mondays, and here are our foreign keys, which relate directly to the instructor and the course, so me and Web Architecture. So I can say select, well, I'm not going to do the join because you know how to do joins. Sorry, select star from instructor where ID equals 1, which is this one here. The instructor is me, and course, which relates to this here, is 1. There's Web Architectures. So there's an example of inserting a piece of reference data which has links to other objects in the domain model. So hopefully that shows that up as well. I think that is enough. Add requests for clarifications to the wiki, add any questions about anything else to the wiki, catch me in class. You know the procedure by now. So yeah, I hope everything is going okay with the assignment, and I'll see you all in the week.